Our next speaker is Adrien Carton from Glass for Europe, Belgium. Adrien is the Sustainable Construction and Industrial Policy Manager at Glass for Europe, where he leads advocacy efforts on building-related legislations. He also serves as the primary liaison for national associations representing flat glass processors. Adrien previously worked as a consultant focusing on strategies to improve the energy efficiency of buildings. Today, he will speak on a new energy performance of buildings directive, trends, implementation, challenges, and opportunities for the glazing sector. Adrien.
All right. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. This is good because we're going to have like a direct follow-up to what we were discussing before, because we heard about the barriers, how to overcome them, and we're going to discuss now how to overcome them with legislation. So I'm here to tell you a bit about the new energy performance of buildings directive, which was adopted last year at the EU level. Before this, just a quick word of introduction. So my name is Adrien Carton. I work at Glass for Europe, which is the trade association of flat glass manufacturing in the EU that you might be already familiar with. We have 5 members company and 9 national association, which represent 12 member states. So obviously we do engage in all the advocacy at the EU level. We're based in Brussels. It's easier to do so. So, the Energy Performance of Building Directive, what do we really talk about when we talk about this? Well, we talk about a lot of those, because we love acronyms at the EU levels. We talk about MEPS, we talk about EPC, ZEB, WLC, and so on and so on. They have a meaning, and this is what they're for. So minimum energy performance standards, which was, I'm going to dive into it in a moment, that was a big part of the new directive. Zero-emission buildings, which is the new standards that we have set for new constructions. One-stop shop, which are also going to be one of these tools that we hope are going to be implemented at the national level and will help developing and enhancing renovation. Just for you to understand, so this is a directive we're talking about, so that's a piece of legislation which is agreed by the institutions but then needs to be translated at the national level. So there's a margin that member states can play with, so they can decide on some specific aspect of it. This was the 4th revision since 2002 of the directive. The previous revision was from 2018, so it came quite fast because the work started in 2022, if I'm correct. It always takes a bit of time to be implemented or to be discussed and validated at the EU level. But the new revision was decided mostly because there was a momentum, because during the last mandate of the European institutions, you might have heard about the European Green Deal, which we talked a lot about. So the EU has agreed to be carbon neutral in 2050. So the question is, how do we get there? And the Energy Performance of Building Directive addresses how the building stock, the EU building stock, gets there. What was particularly interesting as well in this new revision is that it's not only talking about energy efficiency, but we're looking a bit at the broader scope. So we talk about mobility, because like for charging electric vehicle, the role that buildings can play in this. We address decarbonization of the building, but also of the materials with whole life carbon analysis. There's also a lot of provisions regarding sanitary and health issues, which are becoming more and more important and relating to the building. So we have set with this new directive quite ambitious objectives, because, well, you have them there on the slide. So we're supposed to reach like a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emission in comparison to 2015. This is the target for 2030. We also hope to have like 35 million of building renovated by then. So there is an ambition. I'm going to introduce you some of like the provisions which were decided and which are going to be put in place in order to achieve these objectives. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because there's way too many of them, but we'd be happy to discuss if you have more questions afterwards. just briefly, the four main item and the four main objectives of the revision. So the decarbonization of the building stock, the introduction of zero-emission building as a new standard, what it means, like this is defined. So far, we only had a definition of nearly zero-emission buildings. So now we know where we want to go. Also, as I was saying, provisions on the whole life carbon of buildings, which are mostly focusing on new buildings, but are quite relevant. Then the instrument, the tool to boost the renovation, because this is clearly not happening and has not materialized so far. So minimum energy performance standards was one of the big conversation at the EU level. It took way too much importance because it became, this is a political discussion obviously, so there's like political reasoning behind it, making it a bit complicated. We also have National Building Renovation Plans, which I'm going to talk about, which is supposed to provide some guidance as to where to go. Then the enabling framework as well, with the one-stop shop, so like how to make sure that people who do want to renovate their buildings, they can get the right set of advice, they know where to go to ask for advice. This is also an important thing. And finally, like a modernization and system integration, so this is a bit like all the other provisions of the EPBD. So as part of the new directive, a lot of new, I don't know if you're going to be able to read that, but this is like where we're supposed to go in 2050, 2025, back there. So how are we going to get there, and what we're supposed to do, what are the main provisions which needs to be achieved. This is from a very well done report from BPIE. I have more information on it at the end of the presentation, but just for you to know, this is roughly what it's supposed to look like. So first, National Buildings Renovation Plans. These are replacing, and sorry, like it's a lot of like EU terms, but they're replacing the long-term renovation strategies. So in the previous EPBD, all the member states had to have like these long-term renovation strategies of like, okay, this is where we're going to go, this is where we want to like renovate our building stocks at the national level. But it was not easy to compare the data. Everybody was doing pretty much what they wanted to. So with this new revision, we decided we're going to have like a common template. We're going to have like a two-stage submissions, meaning the European Commission will have a say into what the member states are proposing, meaning if the new building renovation plan is not ambitious enough, the Commission can say, okay, work on this, work on that, improve it to make it better. Also, new provisions to make it much more inclusive, meaning stakeholders, meaning you guys, have a say in where we should go, how we should proceed. And so this is very important. Finland is actually usually one of the good guys, like they do properly, like they are stakeholder consultation and so on. It was already previously the case with the long-term renovation strategies, so let's hope it's going to continue this way. Things are moving quite fast, because we're supposed to have like the first draft at the end of this year, and then the commissions will have 6 months to like review the plans and like make some comments back to the member states for them to present like a final version. So what we're going to have in comparison to what we had before, so National Building Renovation Plan in comparison to long-term renovation strategies, well, more comparable data. So this is going to be important at the EU level to like see the progress of the building stock. And these are going to be aligned with other plans, so like the national energy and climate plans, which each member state is also meant to update on a regular basis every 5 years. So you have some ideas on the content of the plan, so you need to give an overview of your building stock at the EU, like at the member states level, a roadmap, so how much buildings you want to renovate, how you're going to renovate them. So this is supposed to provide market visibility, which is something the industry usually calls for. So if done well, that's positive for us. And then the policies and measures. So like, how are we going to renovate and what do we want to renovate? So very important as well. And this is where, of course, the stakeholders' input is going to be very important. Minimum energy performance standards, as I was saying, big part of the discussion at the EU level, a lot of tensions around it. So this is what we ended up with. If you have questions about the percentage, why are we, so the idea is like to renovate, non-residential buildings. So that's like a tool to trigger renovation, and we have set some thresholds to renovate the worst performing buildings. So 16% by 2030, 26% by 2033. And if you ask why 16 and 26%, to be fair, this is a bit random. This is political discussion. This is just like an agreement that they reached out. Everybody was coming with numbers, and this is what we ended up with. One important point, and that's something which a part of the political spectrum really fought for, is that to exclude a couple of buildings from these minimum energy performance standards, mainly heritage building, but also like buildings which are complicated to renovate and address, such as hospitals, for example. But this is the case which is mentioned on the slide here. For example, for heritage building, there are always things which can be done, and there's this very nice example in Italy of this villa which the facade could not be touched, but it was not the case, for example, for the glazing. So they did replace all the windows in the facade, so this is not like a lost opportunity for the sector. For the residential building, they managed to make it even more complicated, but they are binding targets in terms of like reduction in average primary energy consumption. This is a good thing and a positive thing in the sense that that's the first time we do have binding targets. So again, we have some directions. We know what we need to address. So we have two main targets, 16% by 2030, and between 20 and 22% improvement by 2035. Again, between 20 and 22, this is because it resulted from political discussion. Out of this, though, for residential building, there's sub-targets, and so the idea is to address 55% of the worst performing buildings. The idea is also to have like a social aspect, and so taking into consideration that usually are people with like lower income living in the worst performing building, so we need to support them as well. As I say, I'm not going to dive into all of it, but that's where the one-stop shops, for example, where people can get advice on like how to renovate, which type of works to undertake, and this is also a tool for them. Other metrics can be used, so the average primary energy reduction is what it is in the text, but member states can decide to go a bit beyond that. They can decide to look at like greenhouse gas emission, for example, a reduction of the greenhouse gas emission from the building stock. This is something which is possible as well. And now to be a bit more specific about glass, because this was more into building in general, something which Glass for Europe has been advocating and pushing throughout the whole legislative process. So we're going to have like an improved methodology for the calculation of like the performance of glazing. This is going to be a non-binding document, and I cannot stress that enough. This is a non-binding, meaning the European Commission is going to draft a new document and series of recommendation, which is then going to be sent to the member states, and it's up to each member state to do what they want or not do with it. But we thought it was very important and some of our priority, which we decided with our members, because at the moment, of course, throughout the EU, like thermal transmittance is mostly what is used. We mostly look at the insulation properties of the glass, disregard like the solar gains that we can get from it. This is a map. There's a couple of member states, and this might be not the most updated map, because it's from 2017, I think. So if you have comments on it, please feel free. But solar gains are not very much considered, so the idea was to work with the European Commission, for the European Commission to recommend member states using the G value when assessing the performance of the glazing. When I prepared this presentation back at the end of last year, I thought we would have the document finalized and ready, and I could present it to you a bit more in details. Did not happen. The document is not yet released, so I cannot tell you much about its content. What I can tell you is that the European Commission is looking at the energy balance principle. But again, this is like, you can't take this into account because this is going to change. The document is supposed to be released soon, but the idea is at least to have like a look at the U and G values, differentiate between the buildings and the type of work that you engage with, meaning if you're just replacing one window, you don't have to engage in a whole like energy balance calculation. You can have a simplified version of it. So this is what's supposed to be in the recommendations from the European Commission. Again, this is up to each member states to decide what they want to do with it. As I was saying, we're supposed to have the version and the latest version of the document soon. It's going to require a lot of work at the national level, because what we've heard so far is that member states are not super enthusiastic about it, meaning they don't really understand why this is useful. Why should we like look into solar gains in relation to like overheating or reducing, for example, the energy from like cooling. This is a bit far from their preoccupation, especially because the EPBD has like a lot of other provisions to implement. So that's what they will focus on first. So this is where all of us, I think, need to come in order to be active at the national level, to go to your ministries, public administration, make them understand that this is a priority and something we should work together and look into. As I was saying, I couldn't go through the whole thing. It would take too long. There are provisions, for example, which are very useful on whole life carbon, the whole life carbon of new buildings, which is going to have like direct impact on the type of products, the embodied carbon of the products that we put out there. This is something I have not talked about, but is obviously very relevant as well. If you want to go further, there's a couple of good things out there that you can find. So first of all, the European Commission is itself drafting and presenting documents. So, for example, for the National Building Renovation Plans, they have published like a detailed document of like how to fill in and how to prepare your plan. So that's something useful as well for, I think, all of us to look into and understand what's supposed to be a part of it. And there's a couple of guides which are there. The one from BPIE, the Building Performance Institute, which I mentioned, and the timeline was from. So a lot of things out there. Obviously, we at Glass for Europe are also available if you have any questions about this. This is what we engage with on a daily basis. So we're happy to provide answers. Thank you very much.